Hi, and welcome to Uncover Your Story, the podcast for creatives, changemakers, and big-hearted rebels who believe in the power of stories to inspire, connect, and make a difference. I'm your host, Sarah Orton, brand photographer, storyteller, and content creator. Whether you have a personal brand or you work for a non-profit focused on bringing positive impact to people's lives, the stories you tell can make all the difference. My mission is to empower you to share your story with conviction and joy and increase your impact in the world. So join me and my guests weekly to build your communications toolkit with actionable tips, strategies, and insights to uncover your full storytelling potential. Let's go. You know when you meet someone for the first time and you instantly get a vibe, which is usually pretty accurate, and will tell you whether or not they're your sort of person? Well, my guest today is Kelly Pietrangeli, and she's 100% my kind of person. The reason I mention this is because Kelly's business is all about the vibes. And I have been learning so much from her ever since we met through a coaching mastermind, which we both joined to learn about getting more visible in our businesses. Kelly is one of those people who is always smiling, and she just emanates joy and a deep sense of curiosity about the world, two values which are also very close to my heart. Kelly is the founder of the successful global business Project Me, which she started in 2013. She helps women find their focus, manage their time and energy better, feel balanced and in flow, have more fun, and become the best versions of themselves. Her Project Me book was published in 2018. Then in 2020, she launched her Project Me podcast and evolved her business, eventually moving to her beloved Ibiza and becoming an Earth Soul mentor to women around the world. This, she says, is when things really took off. Through her work, Kelly acts as a catalyst for positive change, and storytelling is very much at the heart of what she does. She often talks about following the breadcrumb trail to find your own magic, and she doesn't believe in coincidences. I am beyond excited for us all to welcome Kelly today and invite you to listen to her with an open heart and mind. Let's get curious. Kelly, welcome to Uncover Your Story.
Hello, Sarah. Very excited to be here.
Thank you. So we're going to dive straight in with some quick-fire questions so our listeners can get to know you a little bit more. Creative, changemaker, or big-hearted rebel? Which do you most resonate with?
Big-hearted, creative changemaker. I don't really have a rebel in me.
You cheat. Again.
I don't have a rebel in me.
What words do you choose to live by?
Stay open and curious and follow your own breadcrumb trail.
If your life was a book, what would the title be?
Following the breadcrumb trail.
Love it. What song gets you on the dance floor?
Anything by Prince. If I had to name one, I would say I Want to Be Your Lover. Remind me to tell you my Prince story one day.
Oh my gosh, yes. What's a daily ritual or habit you can't live without?
I wake up every morning and I do a meditation. I use the Insight Timer meditation app. That's my go-to.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing those. And I just need to hear about that Prince story for sure, but not right now. So my podcast is all about empowering others to share their story with courage and joy to increase their impact in the world. And I can't think of a more perfect guest for this purpose than you. You have an incredibly powerful personal story, which you share through your podcast, Project Me, and you're such a masterful storyteller. I have literally been binge listening to your story for the past month. It unfolds so beautifully to your podcast, and I know we don't have time to hear your beautiful story through right now, but can you share with us how the narrated trailer to the film version of your life story would go?
Well, first of all, thank you for being a binge listener. I'm told that some people save up their ironing and they listen to my podcast while they're doing like a big pile of ironing. So the trailer to the film version of my life story would be something like follow the inspiring journey through one woman's life as she turns her biggest challenges into her greatest gifts. Get ready for an entertaining, inspiring, uplifting look at the healing modalities, life-changing books, synchronicities, magic, everything that unfolds as she breaks free from self-limiting beliefs and rewrites her story from a place of empowerment.
Oh my goodness, that was amazing. I know you've got enough on your plate, but if you ever need another career, go into film trailers. So in your podcast, you share so many amazing examples of where you've put something out into the universe, whether that be through a vision board or a gratitude journal or just your intentional thoughts. And this has then led to these things coming true. And I feel like I had a small taste of that when I first started listening to your podcast and realized how I would love to interview you on mine. And I planned to ask you. And then the very next day, I got a message for you putting yourself forward to be a guest on my podcast, which made my day. So in your message, you said that storytelling has been so important in your business. Can you tell me more about this?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll say everything is energy. And by you placing that intention out there into the universe, I was able to receive it because I suddenly got this idea. I'm like, oh, Sarah's doing a podcast about storytelling. I wonder if she would like me to be on, So it was like,
Yeah.
the synchronicity was there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, storytelling has been the key to my business, really. People resonate with stories. If I'm just posting my offers on social media or in my newsletters, just telling people what I'm selling, here's how much it cost, here's the benefits to you, all that kind of, stuff that you would put on a sales page or whatever. But that's all I'm doing. People won't really know who I am or build that trust where people would want to spend money on what I have to offer. So I feel that when I consistently share stories, people feel that connection. And then when I do share about an offer, I'm not some stranger to them. And I
Mhm.
even manage to weave stories into my offers. It's like I'll share
Mhm.
a story. It's just has naturally come to me to just weave stories into all that I do. I never thought of it that way. I never did it in an intentional way.
Mm.
But it's just what happened. I started off as a mommy blogger about 12 years ago with my blog Project Me. And I started sharing stories of overcoming all the challenges I had overcome in different
Mhm.
areas of my life. So there would be blog posts on how I finally stopped shouting at my kids, or how my husband and I went back to being best friends when we kind of turned into child rearing units,
Mm.
or how I got my fitness mojo back when I completely lost it, or how I made new friends when we moved. And so every time I wrote a blog post, I always shared a story. And then it was never just, I never wanted a blog that was just going to be like me, like I'm just like sharing I don't know how to explain it. I didn't want to just, I wanted every post to share a story that people would resonate with and then go on to share like the solution or like what's worked for me so that
Mhm.
every post would be valuable to the
Mhm.
reader.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's how I did it. And then, as you said, I launched my podcast in 2020, and that was when I finally gave myself permission to step out of the woo-woo closet and start sharing stories out of that felt very much more personal about my
Mhm.
personal and spiritual growth journey. And that felt very vulnerable to me. And I put it off for a long time. I kept reasoning that it would be a far better business decision for me to do a podcast that was about my blog, to
Mhm.
stick to the parenting stuff, stick to the living a well-balanced life, all of that. I could have gone through the Project Me Life Wheel on each of the 8 key life areas, which was the framework for my business back then. And I could have done an episode on each of those, and that's what made business sense.
Yeah.
But I was like so tired of talking about that stuff. By 2020,
Mhm.
I've been sharing all these stories, and I'd overcome all of that. And I think it was a lockdown impulse. It was 2020 lockdown, whatever. But I was like,
Yeah.
I'm just going to do this. And so I
Amazing.
just decided I almost called my podcast Woo Woo is Wonderful,
Uh-huh.
because it was going to be me starting to share stories about, my journey into all of this. I'm really happy that I didn't call it that,
Yeah.
because I think it was last year, or maybe 18 months ago. There's a podcast episode I did called "Why I'm No Longer Calling It Woo Woo," and
Oh, okay.
I no longer call things that are soulful or spiritual woo woo
Uh-huh.
anymore. And
Right.
so I'm really happy I didn't in my podcast that, because then I would have had to rename my
Yeah.
podcast. So
Yeah.
so it made sense for me to keep the podcast name Project Me, because
Mhm.
then I could kind of bring the people with me who'd been following my blog. They
Mhm.
would at least kind of associate that it's still the same person. So I'm
Yeah.
really happy that I made that decision. But
Yeah.
yeah, to think of how afraid I was of
Mhm.
sharing those stories,
Yeah.
and how liberating it was. It opened up whole new worlds for me. It gave me that permission slip that enough people were interested in it because it went into it's now in the top 2% of podcast alt worldwide, which
Amazing.
still astounds me because I don't do it regularly.
Yeah.
I only make a
Yeah.
podcast episode when I have a new short story to share.
Mhm. Mhm.
But it really helped me to realize that yes, there are people interested in this. I don't have to be
Mhm.
afraid. And it was
Mhm.
instrumental in me pivoting my business into what I'm doing now.
Yeah. I have so many questions. Yeah. So I think it's what I love about how you run your business and that you just follow your own instincts and you don't listen to sort of like the rules of how things are supposed to be. And like, as you know, I'm just launching this podcast and I know you're very much expected to put one out regularly at regular intervals, but it's really interesting to hear how successful yours has been. And you podcast as and when it comes to you, don't you? And then I was, yeah, just interested to know what gave you that courage then to, you said you were quite frightened to start sharing this other side of your life. And so what made you just suddenly go for it? What gave you the
Well, of
courage?
course, it's a woo woo story, but I had a session with a woman who's a conscious business coach in America, and she took me on this guided journey. I wasn't really expecting it. I wasn't sure what to expect with her, but she
Sure.
took me on this guided journey. And on this journey, various things happened. I went into a teepee. I met with some elders. All kinds of things were coming to me, and
Mhm.
then there was this beautiful kind of chest of drawers. And when I opened up the chest of drawers, I said, "Oh, there's something in it." And she said, "What is it?" And I said, "I don't know." And I was picking up this thing, and it was a manuscript, and it said "Woo Woo is wonderful" on the cover. And it was a whole manuscript of like a book of me sharing my journey along this whole, like me sharing stories.
Okay.
And so I thought it was going to be a book initially. And
Yeah.
then, like I said, lockdown 2020, I just suddenly thought, oh my gosh, I don't know if I have it in me to write another book. It was so time consuming and it took so
Mhm.
much energy and everything. And I just suddenly thought, well, it could be a podcast. And then instead of,
Mhm.
I can just like, and yeah, I just turned it into a podcast instead. Yeah, that's where
Yeah.
it came from.
Brilliant. And I mean, I'm fascinated by all these things that you talk about and like you describe as woo woo or used to describe. So, what if you don't use woo woo now? What do you use? How do you talk to them now?
Soulful. I don't know. I
Yeah.
somehow manage now. I think the more we normalize it,
Mm.
so that we don't call it. I mean, I'm still fine to say woo woo, like in a
Yeah.
conversation with you, but just
Yeah.
in my business, I no
Mhm.
longer say that because I
Yeah.
think that it's almost like I needed to say woo woo at the beginning because then if you're not interested in that. If you're not interested in all this woo woo business, then I'm not going to like offend you or whatever. And
Yeah.
so it felt
Yeah.
like like once I owned it and really
Mhm.
embodied the work that I'm doing, I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh, what I don't need to do that anymore. I don't need to kind
Yeah.
of clarify it for people, you know?"
Yeah. Yeah. And what is great about your podcast and your work is the way you are so down to earth with it all. And really, like, it can be sort of like lots of people, or some people may be put off by the whole woo woo sort of image and, haven't had much experience of some of the, as you say, modalities and things that you talk about. But you have a way of making it seem more tangible and relatable. So, yeah, so I love the way how you describe yourself as a down to earth soul mentor. And can you explain a little bit more about what this means? And also, what does it mean to be a qualified soul plan practitioner?
Yeah, sure. So when I was transitioning, it did feel like a really big deal. I'd spent 10 years building a business that served busy mothers with very practical lifestyle management tools and strategies, productivity, and all that stuff that I was doing for so long. And so it did feel like, okay, I know that I know I need to move over to this. Like it's this itch that's just like scratching at me and I have to do it. But I thought, I know that there's a lot of other people out there who've got very soulful businesses who are helping people on the kind of spiritual soulful path, but they can come across or they maybe come across to people who aren't as into that stuff as very out there, you know?
Yeah.
And it was really important to me that people still see me as down to earth. Like I'm very practical. I have a way, as you said, of making the tangibles like make sense, the intangibles tangible, make the intangibles make sense.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, so I'm not Shambhala the light healer, I'm not one of these. And my branding and my imagery isn't about all that stuff because that's not who I am. I am very into equally as into my spiritual life as I am my worldly life. I've got a really
Yeah.
good balance between the worldly and the spiritual.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I when I was coming up with, the new branding for my website and all of that, who am I now? What is my title? And
Yeah.
down to earth soul mentor just really resonated with me. And
Yeah.
so that's why I called myself that. Yeah. So I see myself as being a bridge between the worldly and the spiritual, like helping people and when I say spiritual, by the way, I don't mean religious. You can
Mhm.
definitely be spiritual and be religious,
Yeah.
but you don't have to be religious to be spiritual. I always have to
Mhm.
tell my husband that. He's always like, he
Yeah.
never quite gets it. I'm like,
Yeah.
I personally am not religious,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
people who are in my world and who I work with, some of them
Mhm.
are, some of them aren't. Like for
Mhm.
me, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I just really liked people to understand that there's so much more to life than our to-do list or paying the bills or all the stuff that we can see, hear, touch, taste, feel, the tangibles. And just to understand themselves as a soul having a human experience. And when I think I have a way of doing it with the people who are just dipping their toes in the water in this stuff. Like they know that, but they, like I said, they would go on someone else's Instagram or someone else's website. It would just feel like, whoa, like too out there. I
Yeah.
feel like I've got that more kind of that stepping stone. You can step onto
Mhm.
it with me in a much easier way. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you say qualified soul plan practitioner, is there some sort of qualification or
Yes,
what
yeah,
do yeah.
actually, so I love to dabble in different modalities. It's
Yeah.
kind of what my podcast has been about.
Yeah.
And
And can you
just
just explain what do we mean by different modalities? Can you give a few
yeah,
examples?
so healing modalities such as Reiki or breath work or EFT, emotional freedom technique, tapping,
Mhm.
crystal healing. There's so many things out there.
Yeah.
I call them healing modalities, and it's just
Mhm.
different ways that people can raise their consciousness and heal parts of themselves that are holding them back. And
Mhm.
so I had a soul plan session with somebody a few years ago. Just very curious to know because she said in her, I think it was a social media post or something, that all I would have to do is give her the name on my birth certificate and nothing else, not my date of
Okay.
birth, not my location, or anything like that, but just my
Mhm.
birth name. And she would
Mhm.
be able to tell me what my soul plan was based on the letters of my birth name. And I was
Wow.
like, okay, this is super interesting.
Yeah.
Like, okay, let's see what happens here. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I gave her my birth name, which was difficult for me because I don't know my birth father, and his name is on my birth certificate, but I've
Oh,
never,
nice.
I've never thought about it. So I had to literally go through the attic and like find my
Yeah.
birth certificate, so I knew how to spell it and everything,
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
and oh my goodness, when I had that session and she told me what my soul challenges are in this lifetime that like I came here to overcome. It was just everything, like things I had because you could be a little bit skeptical. And I was like, oh,
Mm.
maybe she's like read up on me, or maybe she's, found something
Yeah.
out, whatever. Now that I'm a soul plan practitioner myself, I realize you don't have time to do that. You don't need to do that, whatever. But at the time, I was very kind of,
Yeah.
a little bit skeptical. And, but the things she was saying about it were just unbelievable. And then she went on to say that my soul destiny is to bring groups of people together and be a catalyst for positive change. And I was tingling like all over my whole body. I was like, yeah, like, yes. Even though I've resisted doing things in groups and I had to really push through all that. And I won't go through my whole soul plan, but I mean, everything she was saying just really resonated with me.
Uh-huh.
So when I found out sometime later that there was a training going on to become a soul plan practitioner, I still didn't think I was going to do it with other people, but I was
Mhm.
just really curious to know how it worked more. Like I
Yeah.
just was super interested in it. So I
Yeah.
did the training
Mhm.
and started doing soul plan sessions for some friends and
Mhm.
it was just spot on everything. And then now I think I've done something like over 250 or something soul plan sessions with people, and
Wow.
it's incredible. Like I'm a believer.
Yeah. It's so interesting. So many of my clients work in wellness. They are coaches, mentors, therapists. So industries where personal branding is so important and where their clients need to feel like they know, trust, and like them before they invest with them. So how do you use soulful storytelling to build that trust factor with your clients? I know you touched on it, but if we can delve a bit more into it. And what tips would you give to others who are wanting to grow their business and bring in more clients?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, I like to share stories in my newsletters. So rather than just talking about what's going on, I mean, I'll go into like this just happened, or I've got a story to share, and I've just got a way of weaving it into a story. My husband says your emails are so long. He's on my newsletter list. Your emails are so long. They really need to be shorter. People don't get through all that. I'm like, well, something's working because like my open rate is higher than most people's, and people stay subscribed and whatever. So it's like
Yeah.
that's what I mean. You can't be something to everybody,
Yeah.
So like
He's probably
I
not your ideal client,
he's,
is
he
he?
is definitely not my ideal client at all. And as a matter of fact, now I will answer your question in a second, but some comments that he made early on in my business, like when I wanted to pivot, he said, "You can't do that. You've built up this following of people who see you this way. If you do that, people are gonna," and that stopped me for a couple of years. So
Wow.
it just, yeah, you have to just really follow your own North Star and not listen to people
Yeah.
who are not your ideal customer avatar. But yeah, so my advice would be whenever you're writing a newsletter or a blog post or a social media post, pretend that you're writing it to a friend and you want to share it with them. Write
Yeah.
it in that kind of like a really friendly tone about something that you're dying to share with them. That's
Yeah.
one thing. And then the
Mhm.
other thing, I'm going to share because I don't write blog posts anymore, but I'm going to share my methodology for how I used to write blog posts because this
Mhm.
could be transferred to anything really. I
Mm.
used to open up a blank Google document and I would pretend that I was my ideal customer avatar. Her name
Mhm.
was Katie, and she
Mhm.
was 40, and she was married to a guy called Steve. She'd been married for 14 years. They had 3 kids. I mean, I learned all of
Yeah.
that in Marie Forleo's B School. I did her online
Okay.
business school
Yeah.
in 2013 before I'd even launched my business. So I learned
Mhm.
that you need to have an ideal customer and that you're just
Okay.
speaking to that one person. And it
Mhm.
makes it so much easier because if you're writing something, but you're thinking, oh, my sister in law is going to read this, and oh, you're thinking about various people on your newsletter list and everything.
Mhm.
Have who your dream client is, your dream customer, and you're writing
Yeah.
to her. So I would
Mhm.
open up this blank document and I would write to, I actually did this reverse thing where Katie would write to me. It was
Huh?
like a Dear Abby column. Like she
Yeah.
would write to me and she'd say, "Dear Kelly, it feels like Steve and I are drifting apart. We're focused on who's driving the kids to which activity or who's going to research swimming lessons. And when we do have a date night, we just end up talking about logistics and the kids." And then I would write back to her. Now, mind you, this is just in my Google document. This is just
Yeah.
how I would get it flowing. I
Yeah.
would write, "Dear Katie, I hear you. My husband and I were in that place a few years ago," and I would describe what that was like. And then I would say, "Here's how we turn things around."
Mm.
Then now suddenly everything's flowing. I've got it all
Mhm.
going. Now
Mm.
I get a question and I just take how she was feeling, how she was describing to me in much, much longer depth than what I just said, like how
Mhm.
she's
Yeah.
feeling marriage, about them drifting apart. And
Yeah.
then I was able to use her language and
Mhm.
write blog post. And really, if I would have just written the blog post as a here are my top tips for how to feel closer in your marriage, but I
Yeah.
hadn't brought myself into it at all.
Mhm.
And I had
Mhm.
my story of, yeah, this happened to me too. We felt like we were just two rearing units. Who's driving them where? Who's picking them up from the birthday party? And I would use this kind of language that people were like, yeah, that's us, that's me. And I would do that for every one of my blog posts. And
Mhm.
when I would then write a snippet of that in my newsletter so that people would click through to read the full blog post, I would get people replying to me saying, "Do you have hidden cameras in my house? Like, you know that this is exactly what's going on."
Yeah.
And I got super, super clear about who
Mhm.
I was speaking to. And I didn't
Mhm.
try to be something to everyone.
Mhm.
I just to one person. And that sounds you want to kind of cast the net out wide and be something to everybody. But if you just stick to who she is or who he is, whoever your ideal person is, and you just write to them, you can share that story with your whole heart. You can share everything so much better. And then it might not be for everybody,
Mhm.
but that's okay. But the people who who it does click with, like I said, they think, "Oh my goodness, you how do you know this about me?"
Yeah, exactly. That's no, it's brilliant advice, really. And like I say, there's always that temptation to think you've got to reach out to all different people, and but no, actually being really focused. And I love the way that you sort of got the question from your ideal person. So I think that also really focused your answer, doesn't it? So, and by answering the question, it's going to be much more useful to
Yeah,
your
so
dream
somebody
client.
could do that if they're trying to think about what stories they want to share. Like if they have to do the work first to figure out who she is and what are their problems, what are they struggling with, what's keeping them
Yeah,
awake at night, if you're going to solve a problem for somebody, you got to get into their psyche. And it
yeah,
usually is us. Like it's usually us a little while ago, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
we've been there. That's how we're able to help people. So
yeah,
by me sharing stories that are how I was just 5 years earlier or 2 years old earlier or 6 months earlier or whatever it was, just something that worked for me. So I think
yeah,
that's something to really bear in mind is just your all you want to do is think back to were you feeling when
yeah,
this was an issue in your life?
yeah. And following on from that, it's very much about uncovering your voice, which I think can be one of the more challenging aspects of developing a personal brand. And I know from listening to your podcast that this is something you also struggled with, which surprised me when I heard that because you seem like such a natural. So can you share a bit more about your journey to finding your voice as a guide to higher conscious living?
Yeah, it has definitely been a journey. And I, for a long time, hid behind the keyboard. I had a story that I write much better than I speak. And I had that story for so long because I felt like I could write it so well. But then when I wanted to say it, I would get completely tongue tied. I would say it in so many more words than even if I'm doing it right now, but like less
Mm,
succinctly than when I write.
yeah.
And so because of that story, I write better than I speak. I write better than I speak. It
Mm,
just became more and more ingrained in me that I write better
mm,
than I speak. And the
mm,
more I told myself that story, the more I stopped speaking. But I didn't realize, I didn't identify it as a throat chakra blockage until
mm,
much later.
mm,
I had my book coming out, so I'd really been behind the keyboard, just writing my blog, writing my book, really not speaking very much. That my throat chakra got really, really blocked, and I went to see a breathwork facilitator. And in that session, I told her I really want to be able to speak at my book launch. I want to be able to speak about my book. If I get invited on the sofa with, whoever the daytime television person is, I want to be able to speak. But at the moment, I can't even speak in a small group. It became like really, if there was, I could speak one on one with somebody if I really
yeah.
trusted them and I felt there was a connection. But
Uh-huh.
my throat chakra got so blocked up that really
Mm,
I started to struggle to even speak if there were three people. I just couldn't find the words and
mm,
everything.
mm.
And during that session, she found a blockage in my throat chakra. I didn't even know the throat chakra was associated with the color blue. But
Can I
she
just jump in? Can I just jump in and ask you just to explain for listeners who don't know what you're referring to? What is what's
Yeah.
chakra?
So we have a chakra system in our body, seven main chakras that run up our spine all the way up, and these are our energy centers. And when an energy center is either overactive or underactive, like underactive would be a blockage, and
Mhm,
overactive is just going spinning and going too fast. So we have these seven main chakras, and they regulate all different things about ourselves. And the throat chakra, located at the throat, that can influence how well you can communicate, whether
mhm,
you're speaking from your heart, whether you're speaking from, a very down to earth place, whether you're speaking, very, very fluidly, or whether you're struggling with your words or like I was always looking up when I was speaking. I was trying to get my information from somewhere up here. I wasn't grounded in the way that I spoke, and I'm still working on that now. But it was a very big deal for me when during that breathwork session, she opened up my throat chakra because I saw blue, which is the color that's associated with the throat chakra. I was bathed in this whole blue light that was just incredible. I told her afterwards, I said, "Wow, I just saw all this blue." And she goes, "That was because your throat chakra was opening." I'm like, "Tell me more," because I really didn't
yeah,
know about the chakras yet then
uh-huh,
either. And so once my throat chakra was opened, still was a journey because I still had to overcome things and find my voice and develop my voice. But
mm,
I began being invited to speak on people's podcasts, to be known.
Yeah.
I used to tell the podcast host I could never have a podcast myself. I told everyone I could never have a podcast myself because, and I would get so nervous before podcast interviews because I was, oh my
Yeah.
goodness, I write so much better than I speak. And I began taking invitations to speak. And I
Mhm.
enrolled in a speaking course in London that was for entrepreneurs to start speaking about our businesses more. That was
Mhm.
super powerful for me.
Okay.
And I was able to then speak at my book launch and share stories at my book launch. And I was invited to be a speaker on a stage at a big women's conference where I'd been in the audience the year before, looking at
Mm.
all these women up there and thinking, oh my gosh, there's no way I could ever do that. And yet at the very end of the conference, they handed out index cards. And we all had to write something on the index card that was like a big, audacious dream that felt like kind of made you feel sick and excited in equal measure.
Yeah.
And I found my pen writing to be speaking on the stage at this conference next year. And even as I wrote it, it was just felt ludicrous to me. Like, really,
Yeah.
it did. And then they came around with envelopes. We had to write our home address on it and put the thing inside and lick the envelope and hand it in. And it turned out they were going to send that back to us just before a
Mhm.
year's time.
Yeah.
Well, when that got sent back to me, it was the unbelievable timing because just, I think the week before that got sent back to me, the facilitator of that conference asked me if I would speak.
What a story.
I know. And so
Um,
again, it's that whole put it out there,
yeah.
I mean, it was incredible. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up this episode here because I like to keep my episodes on the shorter side, and Kelly and I went on to talk for another 30 minutes. But don't worry, I'm not going to deprive you of the rest of the storytelling gold I mined from our conversation. There will be a part 2 with Kelly next week. But so far, here are my top 3 takeaways. Number 1, share your offers wrapped up in stories and speak specifically to your ideal client. When Kelly first started blogging, she didn't just give tips or advice. She shared her own messy, real-life experiences. Also, when she shares a story, whether it's through a blog post, social media caption, newsletter, she writes for a very specific person, her ideal client who she's given a name, a husband, and a whole backstory. So this combination of sharing her own personal stories and writing to a very specific audience is so powerful, which is why her readers feel she's speaking directly to them, with some even joking that she must have hidden cameras in their homes. Number 2, a story-driven signature phrase can help people remember and connect with you. So Kelly's story begins with a willingness to follow tiny signs and synchronicities, what she calls following the breadcrumb trail. Your breadcrumb trail might include a passing idea, a conversation, or an unexpected invitation. Kelly encourages her clients to listen for those nudges and trust them, even if they don't make sense right away. From her early days as a mummy blogger to becoming an Earth Soul mentor in Ibiza, every step unfolded because she stayed open and curious and didn't force the path. I love how even this signature phrase that she uses to convey a key concept in the work she does is so story-driven. So that's something you might want to reflect on for yourself. What signature phrase can you use in your business that will help people remember what you do and connect with you? Number 3, finding your voice can take work and courage, but the results can be spectacular. Kelly once believed that she wrote better than she spoke. When her throat chakra became blocked, she realized she'd been holding back her voice, both physically and metaphorically. So through breathwork, speaking practice, and courage, she went from being afraid to speak in small groups to standing on a stage at a major conference. So if you've been hiding your voice, you can always start small. The next time someone asks you what you do, share a version of your brand story. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. The important thing is to just start. If you want to create a video story for socials but don't feel ready, perhaps start by sharing your story over a voice note with a friend. Over time and by taking action, your voice will grow stronger and more confident. And before you know it, you'll be ready to say yes to that podcast invite. So I don't know about you, but I was riveted by part 1 of Kelly's journey, from following the breadcrumbs to weaving storytelling into everything she does and finding and freeing her voice. And I promise you, part 2 is just as good. So make sure you tune back in next week to find out how Kelly used the power of storytelling to pivot her successful membership business and bring 90% of the membership with her. Also, you get to hear her take on money as energy, where she shares another very personal story about finances and her business. And at the end, we also find out her story about growing up in Minneapolis and her encounter with Prince, which you don't want to miss. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or leave a review to help more creatives and changemakers uncover their own stories. And don't forget to grab my free guide to growing your brand through Soulful Stories, if you haven't done so already. The link is in the show notes. Until next time, uncover your story, own it, share it, and shine.